Welcome back, and many thanks for staying with Bottomline Africa. And before we get into our conversation on the second part of the bulletin, let me remind you of our Twitter poll tonight, where we are asking you, do you think the creation of Prime Minister position will solve electoral disputes in Kenya? Do you think the creation of a Prime Minister position will solve electoral disputes in Kenya? Do tweet me your thoughts at Sharon_Momanyi using the hashtag Bottomline Africa. I shall be sampling your views at the tail end of this bulletin. Also, let me now introduce my panelists tonight on this segment. Joining me is Kakai Kissinger, who is a lawyer and has also acted as an elections observer for the African Union and the Commonwealth. Many thanks for joining us this evening, Mr. Kissinger. We also have Mr. Okia Mtata, who is a civil society activist, and Peter Alingo is a lead researcher with the Institution for Security Studies, ISS, and Dr. Nelson Makanda is the Deputy Secretary General for the National Council of Churches of Kenya. Many thanks, gentlemen, for joining. And of course, this evening we want to speak about the electoral system in the country vis-a-vis what we are seeing in the rest of the continent and even the world, and whether there are any lessons we can draw from that if we need to have some moments of introspection into our own election system. And I want to start with you, Mr. Alingo. Everybody seems to have an opinion about which way to go with the electoral system, if we need reforms. What do you think really is a solution that we need for immediacy and even in the long term?
Much. I think it's not just something people should talk about, in a helter-skelter manner. I think there's need to be to have a structured discussion in terms of where we should go, and a proper understanding in the context of our trajectory for democratic growth in terms of what is good for this country. We have seen for a long time now, since independence, that the kind of electoral system that we have adopted is the majoritarian, or what you call in simple terms, the Firstpastthepost electoral system. And this is the system where the winner takes it all. And I think now history is telling us that this is not working well with the kind of our body politic, our democracy that we are evolving over the years. And there's something wrong. That is the discussion that we have to have as Kenyans. It is the starting point that what is wrong with the electoral system that we have. There are places where it is practiced in Africa, across the continent, but we've never had serious problems the way we have them in Kenya here. And that, for me, is the reason why we need to interrogate the Firstpastthepost system in the context of our democracy. Is it serving us well? I think what we have seen in the last couple of decades is that it's not serving us well. And there are a number of reasons why it is not serving us well. I think it is also about the kind of society that we have built. And remember, democracy is also about society, how people live together, how they relate, the kind of leadership that they have, so that at the end of the day, the people have a say, in terms of whether they exercise direct democracy or representative democracy. Sovereignty still lies with the people. And so the bottom line is how the people of Kenya feel about their system of governance. And that system of governance is brought about by the electoral process. And that is why we say election is one of the key pillars of democracy, of consolidating democratic governance. And therefore, we have to ask ourselves, is the system that we've had over the years serving us right? I think the basic answer is no. No, because every electoral cycle that we've had, particularly since the reintroduction of multi-party politics in 1991, has always generated conflict that has left the nation divided, that has resulted into loss of life, that has resulted into loss of property, and it's conflict that leaves Kenyans divided and very bitter with each other. That kind of hatred is what we need to now interrogate in the context of the first past. Is it the first past the post which is the problem, or is it just our structural issues that we often don't deal with?
Right.
Look at Tanzania, for example. You know, they practice this as well.
All right, and we'll come to that, comparing our system with what we are seeing in other countries across the continent. But I want to engage Mr. Omtata. You have filed a petition in court seeking to nullify this repeat presidential poll. Perhaps talk to us, expound why you found it prudent to do that. And you also alluded to, you know, Kenya really thinking about having the electoral college system. Talk to us about that.
Well, first of all, I moved the court because I personally believe that we should not allow anything to be done outside the law. And I'll be urging the court to quash what happened on 26th of October, because it happened outside the law. And somebody who believes strongly in the rule of law as the ultimate destination that any nation that wants to grow and develop should pursue, I am not relenting on it, and I'm totally persuaded that what happened on 26th of October was a total insult to the people of Kenya, and I'll be asking the court to quash it. As for questions of what is ailing this country, bottom line is the issue of exclusion. And it's not exclusion of the elite per se. It's exclusion of the common man from the center. And you can see, even if you go back just a few years ago, from where some of us come from, you could not get a decent secondary school until CDF came in. Then we began seeing things changing. We began seeing schools change. Now you have got the devolution that has come with the counties. Major improvements have come. Now we have got the presidency that needs to be devolved. State power has to be devolved down to the people. And tribal mobilization for national politics is something that we need to deal with. And the problem with Kenya for me is like somebody who built a self-contained house but made the mistake of putting the toilet in the living room. So it's either you use the toilet and the living room is not usable, or you are not able to use the toilet that's within the house. You have to go elsewhere. And so it's a design problem in our constitution. Right. Mm-hmm. And so when we come to the issue of how we should handle the issue of inclusion, then I'm saying that when you look at the politics of Kenya right now, it's dominated by 5 tribes. If you look at the NASA coalition, it's 3 tribes. If you look at the Jubilee coalition, it's largely 2 tribes. And the other tribes are left out. So we need to create a system that includes everybody in pursuit of national power. And I've looked at it as a way that these big tribes are big because they live in other counties where they constitute minorities. So if we subsumed the presidential vote to be weighted at the county, then we would be able to destroy the tribes and then end up with the county as the unit of mobilization. And that way we'll be able to open up. For example, you had last time Tarakaniti bringing votes. It's all fraudulent because the population of Busia at 488,000 is much higher than the population of Tarakaniti at 365,000. Yet it is Tarakaniti that brings in the thousands of votes that are altered the national stage, and Busia is insignificant as a voting bloc. If you look at Kakamega also, Kakamega has got a higher population at 1.66 million people compared to Kiambu with 1.62 million people. And yet, when you look at the voter registration, Kiambu somehow has got about 1.5 times more than what Kakamega has. All right. And that state of affairs where the voter suppression can be defeated by using the county as a unit and coming up with a structure like the American system where we award points to each county based on the number of MPs for the population sizes, because the constituents are constructed according to population size, and also award a point for equality to each county so that Kakamega and Kiambu would have 13 points each, whereby you've got 12 MPs everywhere, and 1 point for the county would be 13 points. So if you win Kiambu with 1 vote and win Kakamega with 1 million votes, it would make no difference. You just get your 13 points. So the incentive to rig and inflate figures would not be there. And all these funny things you have with the transmissions and what have you. So you'll end up with a very equitable election, whereby even counties like Lamu with only 2 MPs would have 3 points, may not be able to produce a president, but because you require their points to win, they will be able to check the presidential debate, and the people now they campaign on the basis of the programs they have, not on the basis of the numbers of that tribe, so that a presidential election does not become a census of tribes, but an election based on agendas of the candidates.
All right, let me bring in Dr. Nelson Makanda, who is the Deputy General Secretary at the National Council of Churches of Kenya. And as clergymen, you propose to have an expansion of the executive that would then include a Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister's position. Why do you think this is the solution in light of a constitution that was just promulgated 7 years ago?
Sharon, it would be nice for me to begin by acknowledging what my colleagues have already said. They have expressed a few things. One, they have said that after going through these past few elections and having tested this constitution, it's becoming apparent that time has come for us to review, to consider, is this constitution serving us well or not? And if it is not serving us well, since it is meant to serve us, the only thing that we can do is to ask, what can we do to make it better? Because we cannot sit and begin to ask questions and lament, but yet we are charged with a responsibility. Number 2 is to begin to also say that how are Kenyan politics played out? Kenyan politics are played out as a very ethnic, very polarizing, very divisive competition, and particularly for presidential elections. And politicians in this country are seen as representations of ethnic community interests. And as long as politicians are taken in that manner in this country, then if you have a system that only allows 2 politicians who represent 2 communities, you isolate those 2 communities, and the rest of the communities in this country begin to look at those communities as their enemies. And so competition begins to be this community against the other community. Mm-hmm. And so the position of NCCK at this time, it may not be the ultimate review that we will be asking for in this constitution. Mm-hmm. It would be nice to interrogate the suggestions that Omtata is giving.
Right.
But in the interim, since we have already gone through a process, we need to stabilize the country and move forward. Mm-hmm. There are communities out there that are crying. We have been excluded by these 2 communities that are leading. And so we are asking, is it possible to bring in 3 more politicians in the executive, politicians who also carry interests of their communities. But also on the other side, we are saying, dignify the opposition. As it is now, our opposition leaders, those who get to the post as second, they are told, go home and stay at home and wait for another election.
Right.
But consider it. These people have campaigned. They have brought the interest of their followers. They have canvassed for votes and their leaders. But yet we give them no platform to express themselves. Mm-hmm. And so we are thinking that it will be better and prudent to utilize them as people who can be able to come in and begin to ask critical questions from an official point of view, from an official position of official leaders of the opposition and deputy, and perhaps even granting and budgeting for them to have a shadow cabinet,
right,
so that then we have an organized opposition that is able to question and interrogate the executive for us using taxpayers' money, as opposed to having an opposition that is led from the streets, that is told, go and stay at home and wait for an election. But yet, you think of it, Omtata mentioned Lamu. Lamu, the governor of Lamu wins with about 30, 40,000 votes, and then the leader of official opposition is left out, and he wins the elections. He comes second in an election, having garnered more than 6, 7, 8 million votes. So we are saying, let's kindly dignify the opposition and expand the executive as a stopgap measure as we continue to interrogate what is it that needs to be done in this country so that presidential elections do not continue to be divisive and hurt our economy, hurt our people, lives have been lost, and we do not have to continue in the same cycle. And so for us as clergymen, we have interrogated and we are saying, this is what we are putting on the table. If somebody else has a better proposition, we are reasonable enough, we are rational enough, we will be able to interrogate it as a people and as a community and say, this is a better proposition. But for now, this is what we are putting on the table, and we are inviting everybody to look at it and say, we like it, or we can improve it in this manner.
All right. And Mr. Kissinger, what we are hearing this is voices from different representative groups really largely calling for reforms, whether immediate or in the long term, in the way we conduct our elections. We've had proposals to expand, the executive that is from the religious leaders. We have Mr. Okiya Mtata, who's also proposing that electoral college approach. What is your take in all this? And really, primarily, what is coming out is the need to have ethnic and political inclusion.
Thank you very much for the discussions that are ongoing. And I've listened very keenly to the three speakers before me. And I will want to pick up from what the first speaker began. I think he began very well by posting or tabulating why we have a first-past-the-post kind of electoral process in this country. But I want to remind the first speaker, and maybe basically remind all Kenyans, that we understand that the country has gone through turbulent moments. And remember that out of all these electoral processes, we've come up with systems and reforms. So that when you look at what Kenya is right now, we have a very strong constitution, we have a very strong electoral act, we have very strong institutions in place. But then the challenge just becomes in an issue that we need to ask ourselves and dialogue and find out what is really going on wrong or what is not going on right. Because I don't think the problem is with the legal framework. I don't also think the problem is with Kenyans themselves. I think that the problem is with the institutions that are given the mandate to manage the electoral process. Look at what we went through the other day in terms of the Kenyan electoral process. Everything went on very well, but then the problem only happened at the last level. Now, when we came up with this institution in 2010, we remember that there was Agenda 4 commissions that were established, and part of the Agenda 4 commissions, two things only remain up to now. One is the Constitution, and number two is the National Integration and Cohesion Commission. This is the commission that was meant to deal with issues of ethnicity. The last speaker is talking about issues of ethnicity that has encroached the country and which makes it very difficult to vote. And this was one of the commissions that was established under Agenda 4 to deal with the issues of ethnicity. The problem of Kenya is not about the electoral process, neither is the problem of Kenya about the legal process. The problem of Kenya that we face right now is ethnicity. And until we discuss and agree on what is the best way forward to deal with this ethnicity, we will always have problems and challenges in dealing with the electoral process. When the church recommends that we should have a new order or expand the executive to include the office of the Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister, I don't think that's solving the problem. We'll still have these challenges in future because we are not going to be amending our constitution just to fit specific agendas just coming in. Assuming that the opposition right now is not in government, what happens in the next, if we have another opposition? We should move forward and focus more on institutions that deal with the electoral process as opposed to fixing individual problem of individuals in an electoral process. So I would want to imagine a situation whereby we start thinking more of what is ailing the IEBC. Remember that we have come very far with the IEBC over the years. Before it was ECK, we had challenges with ECK. We reformed it because of the opposition, and the opposition have been very good in pushing for these things. We've reformed the IBC. We've even now recruiting people in IBC is very competitive, but we're still having a problem with IBC. So where are we having the challenge? That's why we should be fixing and talking more of, other than saying we want to expand the executive. When you look at the opposition has done a very critical job in this country in terms of pushing for reforms and changing the electoral laws. So them coming into government or them being expanded into government will not stop them from exercising their right in terms of providing checks and balances. So we need to deal more with institutions as opposed to changing the constitution. However, I am aware that this is a constitution and constitutions are living documents. We can change them at any given time. We will feel like changing. But then where is the discourse to do so? What is the debate all about? Right. If we say we want to dialogue on what? I can hear NASA saying that they want to dialogue of the coming election. They want another election in 90 days. I can hear Jubilee saying we are not ready to dialogue with anybody until we are sworn into power. So what are we dialoguing about? We should be discussing, if we are to dialogue, what is the objective of the dialogue and what do we want to lead to?
All right. And Mr. Alingo, let me bring you in on this because Kissinger talks about strengthening our institutions rather than really going the reforms way. What do you think about it, especially in the current dispensation of devolution in the country, where if we are speaking about regional marginalization and ethnic exclusion, we have 40% of national resources devolved down to the county. Is this not a start to that conversation about inclusivity and equitable distribution of resources, really, which is what many would say this comes down to?
Thank you. Yes, of course, that was the initial understanding. And I think we have to look at all this in the context of the new constitution, the constitution that we promulgated in 2010. And many will tell you, and you of course know, that it is one of the most comprehensive and progressive constitutions in the world. And the idea of devolution really was meant to temper the harsh realities of centralized, monopolized power, you know, where distribution of resources and power, as it were, happens from the center. So that idea of devolving power and resources was actually meant to have a sense where everyone else can feel included and part of national cake, part of sharing of the national cake. But remember, it is not institutions alone. It is not just about strengthening institutions. Institutions exist. The framework for that exists under the Constitution, and there are also good laws that also underpin some of these constitutions. So that exists. But we have to ask ourselves, do we strengthen institutions in isolation? We have to go back to the very basic and ask ourselves the tough question, what is wrong with the Kenyan person? You know, that for me is the debate. There are individuals who sit in those institutions, and there are those individuals who then mess them up. And there are many examples. Mr. Kissinger talked about the IBC, that we should ask ourselves, what is wrong with the IBC? The problem is not about the institution. The problem is about the individuals who sit there. And that is why we have to ask the problem of the Kenyan person. And that, for me, is about two things. Mm-hmm. That, one, we have a good constitution, but we don't have a culture. We have a good constitution and good laws. We don't have values. Those are the critical things that we have to start talking about, even as we talk about the kind of system of governance that we have moving forward, even as we create peace in the interim to dialogue as many people would want us. Let us go back and ask ourselves, what is wrong with our culture as Kenyans? What is wrong with our values as Kenyans? Because we have completely lost those two things, and those are the primary pillars in terms of strengthening governance. Remember, there are two critical things in good democratic governance. One is the idea of popular control over decision-making and political equality. These things have been distorted in our context completely because we don't have a culture to boot And two, we don't have values to boot.
I guess the big question becomes then, how really do you address the problem, a cultural problem or a social an issue as values? Because how do you enshrine this in a sort of system that addresses a national culture?
It's not a cultural problem as in the traditional cultures that we have. It is the culture of doing things right, the culture of, you know, maintaining fidelity to the Constitution,
right.
A culture of respecting the rule of law, a culture of knowing that every single Kenyan counts, we are all equal, a culture of including everybody,
okay.
A culture of creating a platform where all of us can feel the Kenyanness, and the idea of celebrating diversity, that culture. That is the kind of culture that I'm talking about. And it's also a value thing. If you don't have values, and that is why our neighbors, Tanzania, beat us. Mwalimu Nyerere built two things that has helped that society grow, right? One is a culture that respects the Constitution, a culture that respects law, rule of law, and a culture that respects, you know, diversity
all right.
and inclusivity.
I think we have that point made. Let me bring in Mr. Omtata. A few have thrown in the idea or the proposal of a rotational presidency, so to speak. And granted, we have 44 now tribes in the country, so we would be speaking about 44 by 5 years. So almost impractical, really, but maybe talking about it as a regional rotation kind of a thing. Is this a proposal that you think holds any sort of water?
I don't think it has got any value to think of it that way, because the problem we have is the problem of inclusion, the problem of resources at the bottom. And I'm one person who believes that we could even have 100 presidents from the same village or the same family, provided they do what they're supposed to do when they have power. Power is supposed to be used to grow other people, not to grow ourselves. And you find that people who are in power today abuse that power for personal gain. And that's why you find people trying to say that, oh, maybe if our person gets in, they can help us loot the state. We shall have an access to looting the state. So the concept of state power as state capture, whereby you capture the state and then use it to dominate, oppress, and exploit, is the problem we have. So the question of a rotational presidency is that every community should have an opportunity to dominate and exploit others. To me, is wrong. What should be done is that the way power is acquired should be equitable, so that people can go out and convince people on the basis of the programs and agenda they have to better the lives of those people and acquire those votes. And for me, the only route to achieving that is to depoliticize the tribe, to depoliticize the ethnicity. Let us have ethnicity as a decoration, as a cultural decoration, but not a means of acquiring state power. And that's why I'm very, very strong for the issue that we devolved all the institutions except the presidency. Let us break up the presidency into 47 counties. Instead of saying that we are going to rotate the presidency, whereby only the elites will now be coming in and saying, who will be this? So let us assume that you say today it will be the lawyers. Which lawyer will you give out of the 23? You see? So let us depoliticize the presidency so that it's not possible to vote for a presidency across the nation at the national level. If I'm a Luo and I'm in Lodwar, I should not be able to say I'm voting for Raila because Raila is a Luo. I should be able to say I want to convince Lodwar to vote for Raila, and if Lodwar comes along with me, well and good. If not, let them go wherever they go. So that we should not have a basket at Bomas where tribes then are mobilized to cast their votes. That thing allows for rigging, allows for the kind of insults we hear. And then the other thing we need to do about this country, we have to go back and tell the true story of this country. The Mau Mau narrative is one thing that is the original sin of this country. It has been used to create a sense of entitlement among the Kikuyu. A Kikuyu today thinks that they fought for this country, they own this country, and a man like me from Busia, I'm just like maybe a passerby or a squatter in this country. And the truth is that The Mau Mau were defeated in 1952. The independence was brought by other mechanisms. As much as we appreciate they stood up and fought for their local lands, we cannot say that the Mau Mau are the people who fought and brought independence to Kenya.
Right.
Those kind of narratives have to go out of the way.
Okay.
The KIE has to begin teaching the correct history of this country so that everybody growing up must grow up understanding that they've got an equitable share. We have people like Mekatilili Wamenza in Mombasa at the coastal region who resisted the colonization.
Okay.
They are never mentioned anywhere. So this idea of teaching us a false and embellished history that perpetuates the domination of one community over others is something we must also deconstruct and get to the fact that this Kenya belongs to all of us equally. Otherwise, we are cheating ourselves because right now,
let me bring in Dr. Makanda, please. Dr. Makanda, just talking about, we've seen Omtata talking about depoliticizing the process and the solution. And from what, as the religious leaders you talked about yesterday, it was mostly focusing on reforms. Is this the only solution? Do we have to consider, or are there other apolitical solutions that we can consider, especially to bridge the ethnic and political divide that we are seeing in the country at the moment?
I think the panelists have already proffered quite a number of suggestions. They have talked about depoliticizing our ethnic identities, and I think that is something that ought to be done. One other panelist has talked about values, and that's something that we need to pursue. And we can go on. The list can go on. I think the problem of this country is multifaceted. But we are thinking about, in the interim, what is our immediate need.
Right.
This country is badly divided. As it were, a half of the country went to vote, a half of the country did not vote. Going forward, a half of the country that did not vote will remain with that scar on their face, will remain with that feeling that they have been excluded from the main supreme political exercise, which is an election. But yet, the ones that went to vote will remain with that pride. We went and voted, and here we are. And this only ferments ethnic hegemony. You realize that then people will retreat into their groups, into their ethnic communities, and they'll begin to ask, how do we get other means of accessing power, accessing state power, so that we also feel like those other people. And so we are saying in the interim, let people discuss what are viable interim solutions. And so we think about what is interim, but also think about what is long-term. Changing values is something that you have to work on, and work on over a long time. Changing a culture, you have to deal with it over a long, long, long time. This country, if I'll pick up the issue of values, this country, truth is not valued. This country, what is right is not celebrated. This country, what is humble, and if you come out with humility, you are not celebrated. If you come out in this country and say, I stand for what is right, and I will go forward for what is right, you are not celebrated. Right. And so beginning to reintroduce those values, it's a process. It's something that we have got to pick up as a process and go with it. But in the meantime, how do we deal with the current problem? Because you already have a community that is mobilized ethnically. You already have a community that is divided. And leaders are the ones who are contributing this. Since these leaders are the representation of the, of the people, they are the ones who manifest the interest of these people. What is it that can be done? And NCCK and other religious leaders are asking, can we go back to our constitution and single out one or two sections of this constitution that we can look at and propose solutions that can help stabilize this country? And when the country is stable, then we can begin to think about what are the long-term solutions for the country.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you. And let me bring in Mr. Kissinger. As an elections observer with the AU and with the Commonwealth as well, you have had the privilege of experiencing different electoral systems across the continent. And one, especially now, that is actually a current situation, without really getting into the merits of it, is the Liberian runoff, rather, that is scheduled for November 7th. Are there any parallels that we can draw in terms of our electoral system in the country and others? Are there flaws in our own system that we can, you know, take lessons from other countries across the continent, perhaps?
Thank you very much, Sharon. I will avoid answering the question on Liberia because I'm actively involved in that election.
Right.
So I will not talk so much about Liberia for the reason that I'm actively involved in that election. In fact, I'm meant to be traveling back tomorrow. But I will want to talk about other countries in terms of the ones that have been able to observe elections and try to link what we have or what we don't have in terms of this country. The most amazing thing is that most of those countries that we have had an opportunity to observe in or to travel and see what happens there copy from what Kenya is doing. And I'll give you a very critical example. We were the first country in Africa to engineer the coalition government. You remember when Raila Odinga and Mwai Kibaki fell apart and then the coalition government was formed. A year later, Zimbabwe took leave and followed and implemented the coalition government in Zimbabwe. And many other countries also took leave and borrowed from Kenya.
Right.
Now, what are we saying? We are saying that electoral systems differ. And I think the first speaker spoke about first past the post. First past the post simply means that the winner takes it all. Now, Kenya, we've come out of that in terms of asking ourselves, are we in the first past the post system? Yes, we are in the first past the post system. But is it that really the winner takes it all? No, the answer is no. The winner doesn't take it all. We came up in 2010 with a devolution, and the constitution now took over devolution. And what Okiya Mtata is talking about, the mini presidents, then these mini presidents in the spirit of the constitution are deconstructed to mean the county governors, the 47 governors that we have. These are acting as our mini presidents. So in terms of the electoral process and the electoral system in Kenya, I think we are doing very well. The only country one will want to anchor or associate themselves with is Ghana. And when you look at the electoral system and the electoral laws and the dispute resolution mechanisms, Kenya is the best.
Right.
Look at Ghana doing election dispute resolutions and Kenya doing the same. It's a very good thing. I think for me, we have a good electoral system, and I will submit that here because I've had an opportunity to travel in many countries to observe elections. We have a very good electoral system. What we do not have in Kenya, which we ought to be working on, is asking ourselves, is the referee okay? Because look at the way we've changed our commissions, IEBC as a commission itself, because it's our referee. We keep changing them. We've even gone, and we are the only African country that actually subjects our commissioners before appointment to a very thorough process, whereby we take them through vetting, we take them through parliament, they are vetted, they are given this job, and we assume they will do what they have to do. But then look at what happens. Everything goes on well, but the problem comes at the end. So for me, the problem is, how do we strengthen further this institution? I agree with the speaker who was talking about values and values, instilling values. Mm-hmm. But these are people we vet through parliament, and we vet them and we give them positions. What then happens, or what changes with their values? Look at what happens in terms of openness of the institution, the Electoral Management Board, what we call EMB. Are they very open to the ordinary citizen to ensure that the process is credible and free and fair? But we should, as Kenyans, thank God that we have a very strong institution. That's why I believe in institutions. We should thank God that we have a very strong institution in the name of the judiciary. Right. Look at how it turned around and made that this election was not properly done and you have to be repeated. So for me, it's not about creating or depleting or adding new structures in the Constitution through referendum. For me, it's about asking ourselves what is wrong with us. And the thing which is wrong with us is, one, we don't have faith in the Electoral Management Board. Number two, we do not have faith in ourselves as Kenyans, and we are engrossed with ethnicity. As long as we continue forming political parties based on ethnicity, we will go nowhere. We will change this constitution 101 times. But ethnicity still remains the biggest problem, Sharon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kissinger. Thank you all, gentlemen, because that is where we wrap up our discussion tonight. Many thanks for your very critical inputs on the way forward in terms of our electoral system in the country. Mr. Kakai Kissinger, Okia Mtata, Peter Alingo, and Dr. Nelson Makanda. Many thanks for joining us on Bottomline Africa tonight. And now, let's get to the bottom line. Competitive elections in sub-Saharan Africa are always important historical moments. They have ushered in change, rebirth, and renewal. As often as elections in Africa have been positive events, they have also precipitated moments of crisis, which aggravate ethnic conflict, political breakdown, and related social instability. The question of how the elections themselves are designed and operated always comes into question. The electoral system, or how the votes are cast, are actually translated into seats and has a huge impact, not just on inclusion and exclusion, but also on the tone of the entire political system. For these reasons, the crafting of appropriate electoral system is one of the key factors shaping democratization and political conflict on the continent. Noting that an election system is the key driver of power sharing in government, let's now bring it home. Question is it prudent and or necessary for us as Kenyans to have a moment of introspection and rethink our electoral system, to have one that is either proportional or encompass positive action mechanisms to include both minority and majority? Do we need to think about the proposals for the expansion of the executive or having in place an electoral college system? Are we ready to think of yet other reforms to our constitution? The bottom line tonight is that these are questions that we as Kenyans need to seriously think about. My name is Sharon Momanyi. Have a good night.